If the New Orleans Saints do the unexpected and move on from quarterback Derek Carr, Spencer Rattler should get his shot to lead the team in 2025, but not without competition. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jaxson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media, covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, Kellen Moore hasn't made a lot of decisions just yet in his early days in New Orleans, but one that he made was a major win, already winning over some of his players. We'll break that down. We'll also take a look at why you shouldn't expect a Washington Commanders or Los Angeles Chargers quick turnaround for the New Orleans Saints in 2025. I'll tell you what the real virtue is going to be in this upcoming season. And we're going to start everything off with the Saints potentially doing the unexpected and moving on from Derek Carr. If they do, then Spencer Rattler should be given the opportunity to lead the team in 2025, but competition will only make that conversation better. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode, whether it's your first time or your next time. We appreciate you being here this time for another episode and making us your first listen, being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If the New Orleans Saints do move on from a veteran quarterback in Derek Carr, giving Spencer Rattler a shot in 2025 makes sense, but he wouldn't be the only one in the conversation. So let me start off with why I think Spencer Rattler would deserve the shot. Look, he started, 6 games last year. All 6 of those games were losses. And, we can do the injury thing and say that he never had Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Alvin Kamara, all healthy, all in one game and all those other things. Didn't have Eric McCord for certain games and stuff like that. But I'm going to leave that to the side because if we're not going to make injury excuses for one quarterback, we shouldn't make injury excuses for another quarterback. And remember, my my understanding of the idea of moving on from Derek Carr doesn't really have anything to do with Derek Carr's performance, right? It doesn't really have anything to do with how he is as a quarterback, how he performed as a quarterback. It's just, where do you want to invest your time? If I'm a head coach, I want to invest my time on the guys that can be my future, not the guy that I'm relying on the exceptions of the world to prove could be my future. And so with that being the case, I would say that if the Saints do move on from Derek Carr, I would be looking to give Spencer Rattler a shot to lead the way. 6 foot, 211 pounds. He's a guy that's going to be considered undersized at his position. There's no doubt about that. 4.95 speed in terms of his 40-yard dash, but at 1.67 10-yard split. Not bad on the 10-yard split. Not too terribly dissimilar from Jalen Hurts, for instance, at 1.6. But I think the thing that he told me during the season that I brought to the show that I also wrote over at LouisianaSports.net is that a big focus for him this offseason is speed, right? Training, building, all those other things, not having to come off of a draft process that didn't give him any time to be able to focus on the things that he needed to focus on, all those other things. I think it could be interesting to see what a Spencer Rattler could look like in a Kellen Moore offense that's going to build itself specifically to highlight the things that his players do well. And of course, that would bring a run game to help support the quarterback also. And so the way that I look at it when it comes to Spencer Rattler is that what he gives you are some of those kind of intangible things that you look for in a quarterback. I mean, the players love him. They like being around him. They like his leadership. They like his confidence. He's a good leader. He's a good communicator. It's all the stuff that doesn't show up in the stat sheet. It's a really interesting thing because I've been arguing and having this argument amongst the Locked On NFL hosts, and I'm kind of that, the guy that takes out his sword and everybody's charging at him and stuff like that. And I'm having this conversation around the idea that, Jalen Hurts should be amongst the elite quarterback conversation in the NFL. Is he Patrick Mahomes? Is he Lamar Jackson? Is he Josh Allen? No, but is he Joe Burrow? Yeah, kind of. You know what I mean? And so the way that I look at it is those two, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, to me, both deserve to be in the elite conversation. If one doesn't, then the other doesn't. To me, those two are tied together. And so when I have those conversations, what I get all the time is, well, he's a great leader. He's super clutch and he shows up in the biggest games, but he's not an elite quarterback. What do you mean? All those things sound rather elite to me. You know what I mean? And so I think that we remove intangibles when it's convenient. We remove intangibles to make an argument against what a quarterback can bring. And I think that the intangibles that Spencer Rattler brings are pretty good ones. And so the physical traits, not too terribly dissimilar from a Super Bowl winning quarterback right now. The intangible traits, not too terribly dissimilar. Now, the next thing you got to do is make sure that you build a game plan that supports what it is that he does well on the field, right? Now we're getting into not physical traits, not intangible traits, but what can you do on the football field in terms of producing, right? Where do you really, where's your best throw, right? Are you excelling in the short and intermediate area, but not necessarily in the deep area? Do you have a good deep ball? Are you able to get the ball out with touch? Are you able to get the ball out quickly? All these other things. Those are the things that you kind of just have to figure out with a young quarterback like Spencer Rattler, who would look very different his second year than he looked in his first year. So you kind of have to learn all of those things. One of the best ways to learn all of those things, however, is to provide competition. I've been talking about for weeks now guys like Kyle McCord, guys like Jaxson Dart. I don't think that either should be drafted in the first round. I don't really know that a lot of quarterbacks should be drafted in the first round at all in this quarterback class, but quarterback is always going to go higher than it needs to go. So we'll see what actually happens, especially after the combine, pro days, top 30 visits, team interviews, all those other things. That's all going to change everything in terms of draft stock, because then it's going to move from the scouts' hands to the coaches' hands. And when the coaches fall in love with the player, that's why players go in the first round that scouts have like day 2, day 3 grades on. The coaches tend to screw that up. So we'll have to see exactly what happens when it comes to all that. But if a guy like Jaxson Dart's available in the 3rd round, if a guy like Kyle McCord's available in the 4th or 5th round, I think you take a flyer on those guys if you've been able to address the major positions that you have to address. The Saints have the advantage of having 9 picks. I personally would avoid this year's draft class, but that's just me. What the New Orleans Saints will do, very different than what it is that Ross Jackson would do, because Ross Jackson is one mind when it comes to an NFL team. They have several people that are all kind of creating dissenting opinions that are making sure that they're bouncing and working off of one another, things like that. It's a much better process than just one guy with no one to argue with but himself. So it's a very different situation. But I think competition makes players better. Competition drives development. Competition drives improvement. And so if you're the New Orleans Saints, move on from a veteran quarterback in Derek Carr, and you're going from proven to unproven, then you want to give unproven the best opportunity to prove themselves. And so you put unproven against unproven and see which one comes out proven. Does that make sense, right? You try to get these two, at each other's throats a little bit throughout training camp, mini camps, rookie mini camps, OTAs, all that other stuff. And then by the time that you walk out of that, one of them has proven something to you, the organization. And that's how they earn their opportunity to be a starter. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. When it comes to any of the quarterbacks in this year's draft, I'd probably take Spencer Rattler over all but maybe one of them. And so we'll see where things go when it comes to all of this. But if the Saints do indeed make the decision to move on from Derek Carr, which I'll tell you right now, I do not anticipate. Again, there's a difference between Ross Jackson's opinion and the decision that Ross Jackson would make and the decision that the New Orleans Saints could, should, and would make, right? That's going to be very different. So I don't anticipate New Orleans doing it. I'll be very surprised if they do, but I do think it's the right decision. But if they do move on from Derek Carr, I do think that Spencer Rattler has the intangibles, has the physical traits, and has the ability to produce on the field. I think we've seen a little bit of it already, that are at least worth investing in over the course of the offseason, driving competition, driving development, driving improvement, and giving him an opportunity, if he earns it, to have the shot to lead this team in 2025 and see where you get from there. Coming up next, let's take a look at why in 2025 you should not have expectations for a fast turnaround. There's one virtue and one virtue only for 2025, and it's patience. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn wants to help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. You know, as a small business owner, that your day does not end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, and that's why small business owners love LinkedIn, because when you do clock out, LinkedIn clocks in, making sure that any of those job postings, hiring notices, everything that you're trying to put out there, get in front of the candidates that you're actually going to want to talk to, the highly qualified candidates. 72% of small business owners say that LinkedIn has helped them find high quality hires. You can be in that number too. I've used LinkedIn Jobs before. I was on the other side in terms of somebody looking for work, and the way that they just send you things that are tailor-made for exactly what it is that you're looking for, experience, stuff like that, made it super easy for me to find places to apply, all that. That's the type of kind of confidence you want to have in your job posting. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, there is one word that I have for the 2025 NFL, or really the 2025 New Orleans Saints season. And that word is simple. It's patience. In fact, it's patience, 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 right? It's actually three words. They're just all the same. For me, it's patience from the New Orleans Saints. It's patience from the fan base, and it's patience from Kellen Moore himself. I'll throw in actually a fourth patience from people like me too, within the media. I think that that's necessary when it comes down to what's going to happen in 2025. It's easy to sit back and say, you know what? Look how quickly things went over for the Washington Commanders, right? They were the last team to hire a head coach. They hired Dan Quinn. He brought in some solid coordinators to help them out, built out the coaching staff, completely redid the defense. I think it was only one returning defensive starter in 2024 from 2023 for that Washington Commanders defense. And then they went to the NFC Championship game on an incredible run. But here's the difference, right? We all knew Jaden Daniels was going to be special. I mean, those of us in Louisiana and probably Arizona knew that he was going to be special. And then a whole bunch of people from outside of those two states also knew that he was going to be special. And not only was he special, he put together one of the greatest rookie quarterback seasons we have ever seen, behind one of the worst offensive lines in football going into the season. But because of his ability, his mind, his athleticism, his speed, his processing, all of the elite traits that Jaden Daniels has, because of all of that, he was able to kind of diminish some of those concerns, make up for some of those concerns. So, okay, Washington, clearly not the best example for New Orleans, right? Yes, the Saints got the last hire in the cycle, and they got a pretty good offensive mind, if I do say so, when it comes to Kellen Moore. But we got to see how the rest of the staff breaks out, things like that. And it's unlikely that they're going to find their franchise quarterback at pick 9. In fact, it's unlikely that they're going to find their franchise quarterback in the draft in 2025 because it's just not that class. This class is closer to the Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral, Malik Willis class than it is to the Trevor Lawrence class, or even to just last year's class with Caleb Williams as well as Jaden Daniels. The better class is coming in 2026. Now, certainly I'll have said that. And sometime, at some point, one of these 2025 quarterbacks will turn into an all-pro Hall of Famer at some point in his career. That's the way the cookie crumbles. I'm okay with that. But I'm not willing to roll the dice on the New Orleans Saints saying there's a quarterback in this class that will change our entire trajectory, franchise, everything, and march us to a NFC Championship game in 2025. I'm not willing to put that money down, right? So I think patience will be necessary. Look at the Los Angeles Chargers. They were drafting, 5th overall last year? And then they turned around and made themselves a playoff team. But here's the difference. They had the quarterback in place. They went and got the head coach. They already had the elite quarterback, or not elite quarterback, but they already had the franchise quarterback, let me say it that way, in Justin Herbert, borderline guy in terms of expectation versus reality and all these other things. But that's not the case for New Orleans, right? They don't have, and we've said this before many times, they don't have a quarterback on a rookie contract that's a bona fide starter with multiple years of several games of starting experience. They have one guy on a rookie contract with multiple games of starting experience in one season. That's Spencer Rattler. It's one of the reasons why I think it's worth, if you move on from Derek Carr, giving Spencer Rattler the opportunity here in 2025 with competition to drive him. And so that doesn't really apply either. They also hired a head coach that has been to a Super Bowl before. Now, as a head coach, now the Saints hired a Super Bowl winning coordinator in Kellen Moore, which is great, but not necessarily the same thing. And so the requirements, again, don't match exactly where the New Orleans Saints are. How about the Houston Texans? Now, the Houston Texans are an interesting one, but again, first-time head coach, first-time rookie quarterback coming in, and they did some great things between D'Amico Ryans as well as C.J. Stroud. But again, they drafted C.J. Stroud with the number 2 overall selection in the draft, which the Saints do not have. They will not get one of the top 2 quarterbacks in this year's draft without trading up. And so we'll see if they do that and make that decision. I just don't see that coming here on February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. Happy upcoming Valentine's Day to everybody. So, and by the way, CJ Stroud was the best quarterback in that class. He was quarterback 1, not Bryce Young. I want to make sure that I mention that as well. And so you walked away with the best quarterback in that draft class, and you made it to 2 straight playoff appearances. That's great. That's awesome. But I don't think the exception will become the norm for the New Orleans Saints here in 2025. There are far fewer examples of that quick a turnaround than there are examples of the long, sustained process. The Detroit Lions, long, sustained process. The Buffalo Bills, long, sustained process, right? Cincinnati Bengals, pre-Joe Burrow, long, sustained process. And so I think that's what you're going to be seeing here for New Orleans. Now, could things end up looking like the Los Angeles Rams when they hired Sean McVay? Sure. Looking like the New Orleans Saints when they hired Sean Payton? Sure, absolutely. Those things can indeed happen. But I think patience is the virtue here. And if things turn around quickly, then that's awesome. There's just no reason to kind of expect that right now. The correct expectation, in my opinion, I shouldn't say the correct, my recommended, like if I'm writing out your prescription form right now, Dr. Jaxson, my recommendation and my prescription is for patience. And so you can take that to the pharmacy. Don't take that to the pharmacy. They won't give you anything. But it's not just patience for a fan base. Like that's what you're going to hear a lot of. It's like, oh, fans need to be patient. Fans need to be patient, blah, blah, blah. Not really. Not really. Like you're a fan for a reason, right? Be a fan. That's fine. Be patient. Don't be patient. I do think that patience is warranted just for your own heart health. But I do also think that the most important spots where patience needs to come into play are with the organization and with Kellen Moore. And I mean Kellen Moore having patience as well. The two can't get frustrated with one another if this takes 2-3 years. The two can't get frustrated with one another if this takes 3-4 years. You have to give time, and you have to be willing to give that time. And I think that the Saints will. And Kellen Moore strikes me as a very patient dude. And so I don't think that we're going to see much of a rift happen if this gets to 2027 and they haven't made it back to the playoffs yet. They'll be tempted to, because that would be a 6-year playoff drought at that point, right? Because it's already been 4, then you go 2025, 2026. If you haven't made the playoffs yet, it's totally 6 years. But you kind of have to draw a line between 2024 and 2025. This is what we're calling the new beginning for New Orleans, the new era for New Orleans. There's no more Sean Payton holdover stuff. There's no more of that. There's no more ties to the past in that way. This is kind of it. That's done. Now it's time to be patient in this new era. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, whether it's a public service announcement, whether it's a Dr. Jaxson prescription, whatever is necessary. Just wanted to mention, I do think that patience from the organization, patience for Kellen Moore, patience from the fan base, to an extent, right? You have every right to be a fan. Like, don't limit yourself here. And then patience from the media is all necessary. I don't think that there's any world in which, over the course of the next 3 years, unless things are going absolutely horribly, we're going to be talking about Kellen Moore needs to be out of here. I don't think that that would be fair. If we're saying right now that we need to be patient, we should be willing to be patient. Obviously, there's exceptions, but that's the way that I think that things should go as they move forward. And certainly patience for 2025 is necessary. All right, coming up next, Kellen Moore hasn't had a lot of time to make a lot of decisions, but boy, the one decision that he has had the opportunity to make, or one of the early decisions he's had the opportunity to make, is absolutely a winner. Let's get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Even though the NFL season may be over, the NBA season well underway, and there's only one place to go to make it even better, and that's with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. One of my favorite things that you can do over at FanDuel is live betting. Even if you miss the opening tip, you can go ahead and bet all the way down to the end of the fourth quarter. Get involved in your favorite games tonight. The Pelicans on a back-to-back going up against the Sacramento Kings. Lost last night with Kellen Moore in the building. Way to go, Pels. They're 8-point underdogs tonight up against the Sacramento Kings. And that's great because if you are a first-time FanDuel user, you're going to want to find a heavy favorite like the Sacramento Kings and put $5 down. Why? Because over at FanDuel right now, you can get $150 in bonus bets as a new customer if your first $5 bet wins. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com and join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Kellen Moore has only been in the New Orleans Saints facility for a couple of days and has only made a couple of decisions so far on his coaching staff. And one in particular, both are good, but one in particular shows you already how much he understands his players. The New Orleans Saints coaching staff has continued to see some exits. Joe Woods heading over to the Las Vegas Raiders as their defensive pass game coordinator. Following him, in my little heart breaks a little bit, is Marcus Robertson, the defensive backs coach from New Orleans, going to Las Vegas to carry on the same role there as a defensive backs coach. He was one of the three guys that I said that New Orleans should consider keeping. It was Marcus Robertson, the defensive backs coach, Clancy Brown, the tight ends coach, as well as Keith Williams, the wide receivers coach. And well, Kellen Moore came through. Kellen Moore came through. He has retained, according to Nick Underhill over at NewOrleans.football, Keith Williams as their wide receivers coach. This is a fantastic move by Kellen Moore, and one that shows you that he already understands the value of what it is that his players want. And we've seen this before from Kellen Moore, not necessarily in this way, but let me take you back to week 4 of the Philadelphia Eagles 2024 season. The team is 2-2. They're struggling on offense. There's calls to fire Nick Sirianni. There's calls to bench Jalen Hurts and all these other things. Guys like Landon Dickerson and Lane Johnson, big-time offensive linemen, going to Kellen Moore, having conversations around what, Kellen Moore's having conversations with them about what they want to do on offense. This is the way that Kellen Moore builds his culture. He walks around and he goes, okay, what do you want to run? What are some of your favorite plays? He has those conversations with the player. He understands the dynamic between, hey, I'm the guy that calls the plays and, I'm the winningest quarterback in college football history, but that doesn't mean that I know more than you, the guy that's on the field now, right? And so that's the way that he builds his culture. That's the way that he leads. He gets everybody invested and gets everybody involved, at least over on the offensive side. We'll see how things go for that over on the defensive side, but that's why a hire like Brandon Staley, who has a similar approach on the defensive side, would make a lot of sense as the Saints defensive coordinator. We'll see if that ends up happening at some point soon. So when it comes to that conversation, back after week 4, I believe it was during their bye week, if I remember correctly. I think Philly had a super early bye week. And during that bye week, guys like Lane Johnson, Landon Dickerson, and some of the other leaders on the offense were saying basically like, why don't we run the football more? Brooks Cabana actually talked about this. He covered the Eagles for the Athletic last year, and still does. And he talked about this over on Matt Moscona's show after further review, and was talking about how he basically heard them say, why aren't we running the football more? Like, we got Saquon Barkley, let's do that, and then change the offense to run through Saquon Barkley. And then change the offense again at the biggest moment of the season in the Super Bowl to a more pass-heavy offense, and then accepted the Chiefs' kind of challenge to beat them with Jalen Hurts and said, all right, square up. He didn't say, all right, square up, but that would be funny. I would love to hear that. And then he ended up changing the offense entirely and then did indeed beat the Kansas City Chiefs with Jalen Hurts. And so I highlight that because when we think about the keeping of Keith Williams, that is a move that New Orleans Saints wide receivers on the roster are going to be ecstatic about. The wideouts love Keith Williams. Keith Williams joined the staff last year, has spent some time as well with the Baltimore Ravens, I think he was with New York Giants as well, but other teams around the NFL, bounced around a ton. He's been coaching wide receivers, all the way back to his Fresno State college days and everything. So he's been doing, he's coached guys like Devontae Adams. He's been the wide receiver coach for Tyreek Hill off to the side, things like that. Continues to work with Devontae every offseason, if I understand correctly. And so he's brought all these innovative and a ton of experience to the process. He's also a former player himself. And he has an upbringing and a background that allows him to relate to these players who have various upbringings and backgrounds. That's an important part of coaching. It's not just, can you get the most out of the player on the field? Can you get the most out of the player in the film room? Can you get the most out of that player in the meeting room? Can you get the most out of that player in the locker room? Can you get the most out of that player one-on-one in your office? Like, can you do those things? And Keith Williams does a fantastic job at doing all of those things. It was a great hire, transitioning from Cody Burns over to Keith Williams, two very different approaches, two very different styles. But what I really like about keeping Keith Williams is that this is another display of exactly what we've been told all along about Kellen Moore, which is that he understands what his players want, and he tends to do what it is that works for his players, as long as it's not going to be of detriment to the game. And there is no world in which Keith Williams is of detriment to the game. So a great retention there by Kellen Moore. And I'm not just saying that because I said that they should keep Keith Williams. Keeping Keith Williams was the right decision. Love seeing that from Kellen Moore and the New Orleans Saints. The other one is the return of Brendan Nugent. So this kind of throws a little bit of a wrench into the no ties to Sean Payton era kind of like thing that we've been talking about, right? Because Brendan Nugent was a part of the New Orleans Saints staff from 2015, my apologies, 2021. 2015 to 2020, he was the assistant offensive line coach. 2021, he became the offensive line coach. And things took a little bit of a dip at that time because you lose your franchise quarterback, all these other things. But during the time where Brendan Nugent was the assistant offensive line coach, the Saints ranked in PFF's top 10 offensive line groupings in their final rankings at the end of each year. They ranked in the top 10 5 times. They were number 3 in 2015, number 9 in 17, number 8 in 18, number 5 in 19, number 8 in 20. The only seasons where they didn't rank inside the top 10 was 2016, where they were number 11, and then 2021, where things took a massive change for this team, where they were number 16, number 18, number 16. And so the overlap in the reunion isn't limited to just New Orleans, though. Kellen Moore and Brendan Nugent worked together. Brendan Nugent was the offensive line coach in Los Angeles with the Chargers when Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator. So there will be no Jeffrey Stoutland. I know it would have been great, but we all knew that probably was not going to happen. Unless he brings him over as the offensive coordinator, but it sounds like that's going to be Doug Nussmeier. I'd watch out for another name like Kyle Valero as well, somebody that followed. It's another guy that Brooks Kameda actually highlighted. That's a guy that followed Kellen Moore, that Kellen Moore rather brought to Philly. Let me say it that way. They worked together in Dallas as well. But Brendan Nugent, I think, is a solid hire. Somebody that understands the game, somebody that knows what it is that Kellen Moore wants to do, and somebody that has found some success. He was the assistant offensive line coach in Seattle, which has just had a terrible run of offensive lines for as long as I can remember now. So I don't really attach him to that. That's just kind of the Seattle football thing that they do over there. But outside of that, I think that with this hire, pairing further investment, player improvement, different changing players, all this other stuff, like, again, no loyalties to this roster. I think that pairing that with improvement on the roster, I think could potentially go a long way for New Orleans in the coming years. Again, patience, right? Patience for 2025. But those are 2 staff additions that we know of so far. We'll see more coming through. All right. I'm going to go talk to Kellen Moore at a press conference. He'll be available today. And then so we'll be on again later on tonight with another episode that just kind of breaks down some of the biggest takeaways from Kellen Moore's introductory press conference as the New Orleans Saints head coach. So we'll get to that in our next episode, which will probably drop later on tonight. We appreciate you very much, as always, for coming through, making us your first listen, and of course, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jaxson, NOLA. Hit me up. When other families doing them, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.